And welcome back live again to Sioux Falls and the Summit League Media Day. We are shifting focus now from the Oral Roberts women to the Oral Roberts men, and you might notice one very key difference here, and that is that there is no head coach with us here on set, and we want to explain what happened. Paul Mills, unfortunately involved in a traffic accident on Saturday and was not able to make the trip. He is okay, and that's all that matters. But he was unable to make the trip, and so now you get the pleasure of listening to Greg Stemen and Brad Newitt, along with myself, talking about Oral Roberts men's basketball. But these guys certainly qualified to do that. So, fellas, as we get into it, ORU coming off a year, 11-21. They were 5-9 in the Summit League. They lost, albeit a very competitive game, in the Summit League quarterfinals to Denver by a score of 90-88 in double overtime. Paul Mills coming in. He took over a program obviously Scott Sutton had been in charge of for a very, very long time. And so you expect bumps anytime there's change like that. But there was some progress being made there at different points during the season that you could see as we take a look at some of the video from last season. But overall, your thoughts year one under Paul Mills. Greg, let's start with you.
I think the most important thing Coach Mills did is he took advantage of the personnel that were there. And one of the things that maybe caught some people off guard, you take a guy like an all-conference guy like Albert Owens, and as a senior, you get him to buy into a new role coming off the bench. How does he respond? He ends up being Summit League Sixth Man of the Year. That shows that this coach is going to get buy-in from his guys. He's going to maximize their contribution, and he's going to, most importantly, get them to believe in a new system. And I think that's the toughest thing to do if you're a new head coach.
Yeah, I agree with the new system was huge for Oral Roberts. It was a huge paradigm shift for them, especially defensively. They went to playing a lot of zone defense. Coach Mills comes from Baylor where they play a lot of zone. And so you think about just from a coaching standpoint, the teaching of that is so much different than the type of defense that they were playing under Coach Sutton. And so that took a while. And I think we saw some times during the Summit League season where they kind of started to get a little rhythm with it, but I think sustaining it was difficult for this team, and that's one thing I'm looking forward to for this year's group.
Last year, Oral Roberts fifth in the Summit League in scoring defense, 75.6 points per game. Interesting, though, in that they played a lot of zone defense. Generally, those teams don't rebound the ball particularly well. This group was second in the conference at 37.5 per game. So obviously we have been around Paul Mills for a year now. We know rebounding is a pretty big priority for him. But his guys got it done on the floor, and that's a huge part of the buy-in, as you said, to this new culture that he's trying to establish.
It is. Coaches will tell you, you can teach certain things and you can emphasize certain things. Obviously, Coach Mills and his staff have emphasized we're going to beat people up on the glass. And in order to do that, you got to have the bodies to do that. And you talk about Albert Owens, who's now gone, but at the same time, they've got some of those bigger bodies returning. I believe they lost one as a grad transfer to, was it Clemson, or I'm not sure where it was. Javin White.
Very good player, by the way.
But when you talk about a coach that likes to play zone, they love to get that length, they love to get the big bodies and then turn them loose on the glass. I'll tell you what, that can be demoralizing, especially when they're gobbling up some offensive rebounds and getting second chance opportunities.
Yeah, you looked at the lineup that they had on the floor last year at times, and it was just intimidating. I mean, they would start 6'8", 6'8", 6'9" across that back line, and I thought that's what made their zone defense very effective at times, and I thought personnel had a lot to do with why they were a good rebounding team. To me, the question going forward, and I know we'll get into this a little bit more, is what they can do from the guard position, because that was the area where they really struggled taking care of the basketball, perimeter scoring, and those types of things.
First, let's talk about the departures. You mentioned Albert Owens. That's over 10 points, about 3.5 rebounds per game. Javin White as a 9-9 guy that grad transferred to Clemson. Austin Reuter came in his 1 year, was the Summit League Transfer of the Year, shot it really well, particularly from three. He's gone. Jontre Harris grad transferred as well to Louisiana Monroe. But that being said, you mentioned guards, Brad. Sam Kearns came in, had a very nice year out of, I believe it was North Platte Community College, and had a great year. San Antonio, Texas. He's going to be a junior this year, averaged 11.3 points per game in the Summit League and almost 4 assists. This guy can be a difference maker at the guard spot.
Yeah, and they're going to need him to really shoot the ball consistently. I thought he had some ups and downs, and that happens at times, especially when you're talking about a guy that's going to be a high-volume shooter like Kearns is going to be. But I think for him just to be a consistent outside threat, they're going to be able to get points inside, but they need someone that can really help stretch the defense, come off screens, and really draw some defensive attention on the perimeter.
R.J. Fuquay is another guard that really helped them last year. He's only going to be a sophomore, so they're young, but they've got some athleticism there, and he's another example.
And I think, and this is one of a personal thing I've always thought. I've always thought good perimeter guys can turn average bigs into great bigs. But I'll tell you what, average perimeter guys can really hinder the development of your bigs if they're not getting the ball at the right time and the right spots. And I think that's the one thing that Coach Mills and his staff is going to need out of these perimeter guys is, listen, are we setting our bigs up with the right timing and getting catches in the right spots? And if they do that, and then their ability to knock down the perimeter shots, as you mentioned with Kearns, that makes them a much more complete team, and that'll be a challenge for Coach Mills and his staff.
As good as those two guys we just mentioned are, and how much, and as helpful as they will be to the progress of this team this season, let's not kid ourselves. The best player on this team is a forward, Emmanuel Nezikwezi. He's a preseason second-team All-Summit League selection, averaged 12.5, 7.5 last year as a redshirt sophomore.
The guy is just a monster. He can face you up. There you just saw him. He's backing people down. He shows a little shoulder and gets by his defender. And just his ability to finish as he demonstrates there, that's got to be just a great area of optimism for Coach Mills and the staff to have that type of building block to build around in your program.
Well, I think, too, in the Summit League, you don't see teams that always have that kind of size and athleticism mixed together in a player. So he is a matchup nightmare for a lot of teams. You know, do you try to guard him with a big player? Well, then maybe he's not quick enough to contain that face-up game that Nezikwezi has there. You see the pick and roll and how agile he is for his size, but then strong enough to finish inside and great on the glass. I mean, he's got a lot of attributes that really become difficult for other teams to match up with.
Yeah. And of course, Oral Roberts, again, you know, Chris Miller will be back as well. He's going to be charged with filling that big man role that Albert Owens has held down for such a long time as well. But a couple of transfers in the mix, too. Kalen Moore from Wichita State. Kerwin Smith comes in after 3 years at Grand Canyon. Those guys certainly figure to help out as well. But what we do know about Oral Roberts is their non-conference schedule is usually ridiculous, and that is certainly the case once again. They've got 8 true road games in the non-conference season. Missouri State, TCU, Brigham Young, Oakland, SMU, Missouri, Richmond, and Wichita State. That is a meat grinder of a non-conference slate right there, just with the road games alone.
It is, and when you're trying to blend a lot of new faces together and find that chemistry, there's a good and bad about it. The bad is you're on the road going into some difficult environments. The good is you're on the road and you're just you guys. It's just your team, and you've got opportunities to kind of break things down and spend time together and have that mentality of it's us against everybody else. So I'm sure Coach Mills and the rest of their staff will use that to their advantage as best they can.
Yeah, I think we've seen this from a lot of other Summit League teams that have played these really difficult schedules, and it can go either way. I mean, I think it's all about how the coach frames it. You know, but the ultimate goal we know for a lot of these mid-major teams is prepare yourself for Summit League play, because that's really where it matters. And, you know, Coach Mills has set this schedule up. I mean, he's going to challenge his guys, and they're going to grow from this. And I think as a coach, too, you get to see, you know, what are your weaknesses when you play really good teams?
Well, and frankly, you go on the road to a team like Wichita State or some of these other big, you know, high major programs, that environment, once you've played in that, what does even Frost Arena, as intimidating as it is there, or the Sanford County Sports Center, places that get very loud and can be very difficult in the conference to play in, your guys are going to be a little bit more mentally prepared for that than they might be if they're just playing games in front of 1,500 people everywhere they go.
And to be honest, to build on Brad's point, you know what? Kids play college basketball for those types of experiences.
Sure
to play in front of 10, 12, 15,000 people, that's okay. And then the other thing is something that you guys both mentioned. The Summit League is a one-bid league when it comes to the NCAA tournament, and your entire mentality is how do we prepare this group of guys to be playing our best basketball at the end of February into March for that opportunity for that one spot. And every coach realizes that, and postseason. The other postseason bids take care of themselves, but that's what you like is challenge your team, set them up for success late in the season.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit about that Summit League now, because you're right. Everything is involved with how am I at my peak readiness for what happens those 3 days in Sioux Falls in the month of March. How do I get to the postseason based on where I'm at when I enter that tournament? Well, as we take a look at the preseason poll now in the Summit League, everybody knows what they've got in South Dakota State. South Dakota has a lot of change this year that they're dealing with. Obviously, Rodney Billups has Denver moving in the right direction. Purdue, Fort Wayne. We talked a little bit earlier with Coach Evans, who was sitting in for Coach Kaufman today. A lot of talent there in John Conchar, and you had a couple of talented transfers as well. David Richmond at North Dakota State picked 5th. Oral Roberts right there at 6th. But it's, again, one of those teams, especially in the middle of that group, it's so much of it depends on matchups when you get to Sioux Falls. Am I right?
Oh, without question. We've seen that. How many times have we seen the 1-8 and the 2-7 go down to the last possession or an overtime game? And all that pressure sometimes of coming in as the #1 seed is difficult. South Dakota State, you talked about a clear-cut favorite with their returners and things along those lines. And South Dakota with that core of talent from a team that won a lot of games. Those two teams certainly make sense in the top 2 spots.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, to your point, Jay, I think there's a lot of things that can happen. I think when you start looking really 3 through 9, to be honest with you. I think even Western Illinois at 9, they've got a lot of returning talent. If that's the 9th best team in the Summit League, we're going to have a heck of a year this year. And so, I think there's a lot of things that can happen when those teams play head-to-head. And then you toss it to the tournament. I mean, you get to the point there, and it's March Madness for a reason because anything can happen.
Just put your analyst hat on here, and I know that's what you guys are paid to do, so I'm not asking for the moon here.
I never even got an analyst hat.
Oral Roberts, given their style, who do they present the most difficulty for in terms of the matchup, given how they play now under Paul Mills? Brad, go ahead.
Well, actually, I think a team like South Dakota State maybe does have a little harder time matching up. I think South Dakota State, you look at a guy like Mike Dahm, he thrives when the teams play man-to-man because he's a matchup nightmare. Now, all of a sudden, he's got to go against his zone defense, and that's not always as easy. You don't see a lot of zone or teams that are really committed to playing zone for 40 minutes like Oral Roberts has in the past. I think that's a team that, watch out. They could give South Dakota State a little bit of trouble. They got some physicality, some size that can bother a really good player like Mike Dahm.
And I don't disagree at all with that because I think teams that are unique to play for when you prepare to play against teams that play, the 90% of teams on your schedule play man-to-man, it's always an interesting, and especially if it's on a one-day turnaround.
Sure.
When you haven't had to prep for all those things, for the zone or whatever it might be. That length, that athleticism, and especially if Oral Roberts comes out and knocks down shots from the perimeter, and you get a little tighter as that game goes on. So I think that's going to be an interesting thing to see. The other thing that intrigues me about, you see South Dakota State, South Dakota, understandable, Denver and Fort Wayne. Mike Dahm, 4-year stud in this league. Fort Wayne has John Conchar, 4-year stud in this league. Denver, Joe Rosga, 4-year stud in this league. There's a reason that those guys put those teams in position to be in the top of this league.
And at this point, he's not a senior, but you got to throw Emmanuel Nezakwezi in there. He's been a very good player ever since he stepped foot on campus at Oral Roberts as well. Just a lot of really top-notch talent all across this league, and that's what makes it such an exciting time all season long. But certainly once we get to the big dance, our little big dance anyway, in Sioux Falls at the Summit League tournament. Well, guys, thanks for your time here helping us out with Oral Roberts. Again, our best to Coach Mills, and good luck to Oral Roberts going forward this season. Stay tuned. We'll be back. JD Gravina will be here to talk Western Illinois women right after this.